This problem has been on my wall for 50 years. No student has solved it. So tell me, little black girl, what makes you think you belong in a Harvard classroom, let alone my classroom?
The professor said it loud enough for all 300 students to hear. Then he flicked his chalk in her direction like he was tossing scraps to a stray, pointed one bony finger at the lecture hall door, and made a slow, deliberate shooing motion. The kind a man uses when he wants the help to know her place. The room laughed. Some clapped. A boy in a Harvard sweatshirt whispered,
"Scholarship case."
loud enough for her to hear. She was 18 years old. She was the only black face in the room, and she slowly, calmly raised her hand. Have you ever been told to know your place by someone who never had to fight for theirs? I'm Vance Narrator. I dig up stories where the wrong person gets underestimated in public. What this black freshman does next doesn't just surprise them. It rewrites 50 years of Harvard history. Her name was Simone Ingram. She was 18 years old. She had ridden a Greyhound bus for 19 hours from southwest Detroit to get here, sleeping with her head against a cold window, a duffel bag at her feet, her acceptance letter folded inside a Bible inside that duffel bag. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father had been gone since she was 4. The Harvard scholarship she was holding was the kind that doesn't come around twice in a family like hers, and she knew it. The class was Math 55. If you've never heard of it, here is the only thing you need to know. Math 55 is the hardest undergraduate math course in America. People build careers on having survived it. Out of every freshman class at Harvard, maybe 20 get in. Most drop within a month. The rest become the next generation of mathematicians, hedge fund quants, code breakers, and tenured professors at places like the one Simone was sitting in right now. The man at the front of the room was Professor Nathaniel Ashford, 62 years old, white hair, tweed jacket, a silver pen in his shirt pocket that his second wife had given him. He held the Bowman Chair of Pure Mathematics. He had solved a famous conjecture at 29. He had been a finalist for the Fields Medal twice. He sat on the admissions committee for the math major, which meant a single bad grade from him could end a young mathematician's career before it started. The man had real power, and the entire room knew it. Behind him on the wall was the chalkboard, and on that chalkboard, written in faded white chalk that nobody was allowed to erase, was the problem. It was a problem in combinatorial geometry. A configuration of dots and lines on a flat plane with a question underneath about whether a certain coloring rule could always be obeyed. To a layperson, it looked like a child's connect-the-dots puzzle. To a working mathematician, it looked like a tomb. A small brass plaque had been screwed into the wall beneath it. The plaque read, "Posed Fall, 1974. Unsolved by any Harvard undergraduate for 50 years. Ashford pointed at it like a tour guide pointing at a battlefield. Every freshman who walks into this room sees this, he said. Every one. Fields medalists have looked at this problem. Wolf Prize laureates, members of the National Academy. None of them, while they were undergraduates, produced a complete proof. None of you will be the first." He smiled at the room. The room smiled back. Most of the students in that room had names their parents had carved into Harvard buildings. Henry Caldwell, 3 rows down, came from Boston Latin and a family of mathematicians. The boy 2 seats over was named Whitmore, and his grandfather had endowed a chair. Margaret Sullivan, the teaching fellow standing quietly by the door, watched all of it and said nothing. In the back row, a young man named Theodore Brennan opened his laptop. Brennan was the senior editor at the Harvard Crimson, the student newspaper. He was here to write a piece called First Day of Legends, the kind of article the Crimson ran every September to remind everyone how special they were. He had a notebook ready and a recorder in his pocket. He didn't know yet that he was about to write a different article entirely. Ashford turned back to the room. "Of course," he said, in the tone of a man telling a joke he had told 1,000 times. "If any of you do produce a correct proof, I will give you an automatic A in this course, and dinner at the faculty club on me. In 50 years, I have bought 0 dinners. I do not expect to start tonight." The room laughed. The lecture was being recorded. The recording would go up on the department's server within an hour. By tomorrow, it would be on a podcast. By the end of the week, what happened next would be on the front page of the Boston Globe. Simone copied the problem into her notebook in steady block letters. Her pencil stopped. She read the second clause. She read it again. She underlined one phrase 3 times. She set her pencil down. Then she raised her hand. What did this Detroit freshman see in 50 seconds that 50 years of Harvard's brightest had missed? Ashford saw the hand. He saw who it belonged to. The smile he gave her was the kind a man gives a small dog that has wandered into a dinner party. "Yes. Did you have a question about the syllabus?" Simone's voice was quiet, but it carried, "I think the problem statement has a small error." For a beat, nothing moved in that room. Henry Caldwell, 3 rows down, winced like he had felt a tooth crack. Margaret Sullivan, the teaching fellow, slowly straightened up. In the back row, Theodore Brennan from the Crimson hit the record button on his phone, then hit it twice more to make sure. Ashford laughed. Not a kind laugh. The kind a king gives to a peasant who has just made a suggestion about the kingdom. "My dear, that problem has been on that wall for 50 years. It has been read by Fields medalists. It has been read by a Wolf Prize laureate. It has been read by 2 members of the National Academy of Sciences. But please," he swept his arm wide toward the chalkboard, like a host inviting a child on stage to embarrass herself. "By all means, come up here and correct it." Simone did not move from her seat. She did not even close her notebook. "I don't need to come up there, sir," she said. "The error is in the second clause. The condition assumes the configuration is closed under reflection, but you didn't write that down. As stated, the problem has trivial counterexamples." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing on your chest. 300 Harvard students sat absolutely still. The boy in the Harvard sweatshirt who had whispered, "Scholarship case," was no longer whispering anything. Henry Caldwell's mouth was slightly open. Ashford's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. He turned, slowly, and looked at his own chalkboard. He looked at the second clause. He looked at it for what felt like a long time. In the back of the room, in a seat she did not normally occupy, a tall woman with short silver hair quietly set down her pen. Her name was Professor Eleanor Whitfield. She was the chair of the mathematics department. She had not stepped foot in this lecture hall in 11 years. She was here today because the night before she had read the class list, seen Simone's name and Detroit address, and felt something she could not quite name but had decided, just this once, not to ignore. Whitfield read the second clause too. She read it twice. Then she opened her own notebook in the 3rd row from the back, and quietly, with the calm motion of a woman who has waited a long time for this exact moment, began to take notes on Professor Ashford's lecture. Ashford turned back to the room. The smile was still there. The voice was a half-step higher than before. "An interesting technicality," he said, "but not an error. We will discuss it after class, young lady. Privately." Simone did not look away. "With respect, sir, you posted it publicly. I'd like to discuss it publicly." The lecture hall made a sound. It was not a laugh. It was not a gasp. It was the sound 300 people make when they realize, all at the same second, that the room they are sitting in is no longer the room they walked into. Theodore Brennan stopped recording with his phone. He stopped because he was already typing. The article he was about to write would not be called First Day of Legends. It would be called something else. And it was about to put a black freshman from Southwest Detroit on the front page of every newspaper in New England. Was she actually right? Or had she just ended her Harvard career in 50 seconds flat? The room held its breath. 300 students stared at Professor Ashford. Professor Ashford stared at his own chalkboard. And the chalkboard, after 50 years of being right, suddenly looked very, very wrong. "Miss Ingram, is it?" he said finally, reading her name off his roster. He was buying time. Anyone who has ever taught a classroom knows what buying time looks like, and he was doing it. "Miss Ingram, what you are describing is not an error. It is an implicit convention. Every working mathematician in this field understands that the configuration is closed under reflection. We do not bother to write down what is obvious." Simone tilted her head, just slightly, the way you tilt your head when someone tells you something they do not entirely believe themselves. "Then it isn't a complete problem statement, sir," she said. "If the convention is implicit, the proof has to make it explicit. Otherwise, the proof is wrong too." Eleanor Whitfield in the back row did not lift her eyes from her notebook, but the corner of her mouth moved a quarter inch. To anyone who had known her for a long time, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Then Whitfield spoke. Once, quietly, from the back of the room. "Nathaniel?" Just his name, nothing else. The way an old friend says a name when they want you to stop digging the hole you are in. He turned. He saw her. And for the first time in 32 years of teaching at Harvard, Professor Nathaniel Ashford lost his place. "Eleanor, I wasn't aware you were—" "I'm auditing," Whitfield said in the calm voice of a department chair who does not have to explain herself. "Carry on." "But she's not wrong about the statement." 6 words. She's not wrong about the statement. In a room full of his students, spoken by the woman who decided his tenure reviews, spoken by the woman who had been, 30 years ago, and for one strange and complicated summer, the only woman Nathaniel Ashford had ever truly loved. A small color came up in Ashford's neck, not a blush, something older than a blush. He turned back to the board, picked up the chalk, and in front of 300 witnesses, the man who had not changed that problem statement in 5 decades wrote a new clause into it. He underlined the new clause. He wrote the date next to it. He set the chalk down. "A footnote," he said to the room. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. "We are talking about a footnote. The problem stands." He turned back to Simone. Now the smile had teeth. "Very well, Miss Ingram. You have found the footnote. Now solve it." He gestured at the board with both hands. "You have the floor. The class will wait." It was a trap, and everyone in the room knew it was a trap. He was asking an 18-year-old freshman on the first day of class to solve in 10 minutes a problem that had defeated 50 years of Harvard's brightest. He was asking her so that he could watch her fail. Simone closed her notebook. She did not pack her bag. She did not stand up. She simply said in the same quiet voice, "I'm not going to solve a 50-year problem in 10 minutes, sir. Nobody could. But the correction I gave you is real. The proof of the corrected statement isn't impossible. It just hasn't been done. Yet." She let the word hang there. Yet. You could feel it land in the room. Henry Caldwell, 3 rows down, leaned over to the boy beside him and whispered something. The boy beside him whispered something back. Margaret Sullivan, the teaching fellow, was no longer trying to hide her smile. In the back row, Theodore Brennan was typing so fast his laptop was vibrating against the desk. Ashford's voice rose. "If you believe a proof exists, Miss Ingram, then find it. Bring it to my office by next Friday." 1 week. A complete, peer-reviewable written proof. If you do, I will retire this problem from this wall, and I will dedicate the seminar room to you. If you do not. He paused on the words, the way an old prosecutor pauses before a verdict. I will expect you to demonstrate the humility appropriate to a freshman. He said humility like he meant silence. Everyone in the room understood the translation. Simone nodded once. Yes, sir. Next Friday. 2 words. No promises, no drama. Just 2 words and a look that didn't move. The class ended. Students filed out slowly like people leaving a courtroom. Henry Caldwell hung back, half a step, and almost said something to Simone. He didn't. He just looked at her once, gave a small, confused nod, and walked out. Simone gathered her notebook. She walked up the stairs of the lecture hall. At the top, Eleanor Whitfield was waiting, arms folded, still wearing her coat. Whitfield did not introduce herself. She did not offer help. She did not even smile. What she said was, "He has been afraid of that question for 40 years, Miss Ingram. Don't be afraid of it, for one." Then she walked out. Simone stood at the top of the stairs in the empty lecture hall, looking down at the chalkboard, at the new clause Ashford had been forced to write in front of his entire class. Her hand was shaking. Just a little. She had 1 week. A wall of professors who wanted her to fail. A father who was gone, a mother who was praying in Detroit, and a problem that had eaten 50 years of Harvard's smartest. Could a black scholarship freshman, in 7 days, do what Fields medalists could not? By Wednesday morning, the article was on the front page of the Harvard Crimson. By Wednesday afternoon, it was on the front page of the Boston Globe. By Thursday, the New York Times had picked it up. The headline that ran in all 3 papers was a version of the same sentence. Black freshman corrects half-century math problem on first day at Harvard. The producer from 60 Minutes left a card under Ashford's office door. A reporter from NPR called the math department 3 times. Olivia Sinclair, a graduate student at Princeton who had been working on combinatorial geometry for 6 years, drove 3 hours up to Cambridge in a borrowed car because she had to see the chalkboard with her own eyes. The whole department was watching now. The whole country was watching now. And Simone Ingram, 18 years old, was sitting in the basement of the Burkhoff Library at 2 in the morning eating cold chow mein out of a paper carton with 7 days on the clock. Ashford was watching too, from his office in the next building over with the door closed. He had not slept well. He kept walking back to the lecture hall at odd hours to look at the chalkboard, to look at the new clause, to run his finger along the chalk to make sure he had really written it. Once, around 11 at night, he stood in front of that board for 45 minutes and did not move. His teaching assistant, a young man named Walter Hollis, walked in on him doing it. Walter pretended not to see. Walter went back to his apartment and called his mother. The next morning, Ashford gave a quote to the Crimson. He said, "If Miss Ingram produces a correct, complete, peer-reviewable proof within 7 days, I will retire the problem and dedicate the seminar room to her. If she does not, I expect her to demonstrate the humility appropriate to a freshman." It was the same line he had said in class, but now it was in print. Now it was a public ultimatum. Now there was no quiet exit for either of them. Ashford had bet his 50-year reputation against a teenager's first week of college, and he had done it on the front page of every newspaper in New England. Reading the quote in her dorm room, Simone laughed. Just once, short and tired. Then she closed the paper, made a fresh pot of coffee, and went back to work. Henry Caldwell, the boy from Boston Latin, found her in the library on Wednesday night. He stood there for a minute, awkward, holding a book. "Hey, so, I just wanted to say..." He stopped. He started again. "I'm sorry. About the laughing thing. On the first day, I didn't think. He set the book on her table. It was a textbook on combinatorial methods. This was my dad's. He was a mathematician. I figured if anyone should have it, it should be the person actually using it. Simone looked at the book, then at him. Thanks, Henry. He stood there a second longer, then he walked away, and she went back to writing. She did not know it yet, but Henry would not be the only Harvard student who quietly changed sides that week. Online was a different story. By Thursday afternoon, an anonymous account on a Harvard message board had posted a thread titled, "Affirmative Action Mathematics." The thread argued that Simone was a publicity stunt, that she was being coached by the department, that she had been admitted only because Harvard needed a face for its diversity report. The thread was upvoted 600 times in 4 hours. By Friday morning, the phrase "affirmative action mathematics" was trending on 3 different platforms. Simone's mother saw it on her phone during her break at the second job. She called her daughter, crying. Simone, in the library bathroom, pressed her forehead against the cold tile of the wall and listened to her mother cry for 1 full minute. Then she said, "Mama, I love you. I have to go back to work." Outside the bathroom, the library was beautiful and quiet and full of students whose grandfathers had built it. Margaret Sullivan, the teaching fellow, slid a thick stack of photocopies onto the corner table where Simone always worked, sometime around 11 that night. She did not say a word. She did not even make eye contact. She just left the photocopies, walked away, and forgot to lock the seminar room behind her on the way out. The photocopies were every paper Ashford had borrowed and hidden away in his office for 25 years. The same papers Simone could not find anywhere else on campus. The same papers that a librarian had told her in a whisper, "He always signs out the first week of fall." The clock on the library wall said 11:14 at night. There were 146 hours left. Could one woman, alone in a library in the middle of the night, really pull this off? This is the part where I had to put my coffee down. 18 years old, whole country watching, and the man holding her future hostage just dared her on the front page of the Globe to either save herself in 7 days or grovel for it. I genuinely don't know what I would have done at her age. Day 1. Simone tried the obvious approaches, the ones every Harvard sophomore knows. Induction, pigeonhole, adversary argument, the standard tools, the ones any decent graduate student would reach for first. They all failed. Not because they were wrong, because they all failed at the same place. A boundary case where a configuration of points sat right at the edge of the rule and refused to behave like the rest. Every time the same boundary, every time the same dead end. She closed her notebook at 4 a.m. and stared at the ceiling of her dorm room. She did not cry. She just looked. Day 2. Simone reframed the problem. Instead of trying to prove the configuration always worked, she started asking, when did it not? It was a small shift, 3 words. When does it not? But every now and then, in mathematics or anywhere else, the entire shape of a problem changes when you change the verb. She started cataloging the failure cases, drawing them out in her notebook. There was something they all had in common, something structural. She could feel it the way you feel a name on the tip of your tongue. She just couldn't see it yet. Day 3. The library betrayed her. Or rather, the library showed her how it had been engineered to betray any student who got this far. Simone tried to find 7 specific papers. They were the foundational papers in combinatorial reflections, the papers any serious attempt on this problem would have to engage with. They were not in the math reading room. They were not in the main stacks. They were not in the borrowed stack section. She finally cornered a librarian, a woman in her 60s named Cora, who had worked at Harvard for 28 years and who did not look up from her computer when she spoke. "Those have all been signed out, dear." "By who?" "Long-term loan." Cora finally looked up. Her eyes were tired and kind. "He always does this the first week of fall. Has done it for as long as I've worked here." She did not have to say his name. Simone said very quietly, "How does he get away with it?" Cora looked at her for a long second. Then she said, "He doesn't. He just gets away with it from people who are used to him." She wrote a name and an office number on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk. "Try her. She owes me a favor from 1992. Day 4. The slip of paper led to Margaret Sullivan, the teaching fellow. Margaret did not officially help. Officially, she accidentally left a thick stack of photocopies on the corner table in the seminar room around 11 at night. Officially, she forgot to lock the door. The photocopies were the 7 papers, plus 3 more nobody had thought to ask about. Simone read until 5 in the morning. She did not catch herself smiling, but she was, just a little. Day 5. The internet got worse. The hashtag affirmative action mathematics trended for 6 hours. A podcast Simone's roommate was listening to in the next room, with the door open, loudly at 2 in the afternoon, called her a token at best, an embarrassment at worst. Her roommate did not turn it down. Her mother called. They cried. Simone said, "I love you, Mama." Then she put on her coat and walked across the snow-dusted yard back to the library. That afternoon, sitting at her corner table, she saw it. The thing she had felt on the tip of her tongue since day 2. The structural feature that all the failure cases shared. It was a small invariant. A single number you could compute about a configuration that did not change when you nudged the configuration slightly. The boundary cases failed because of that invariant. The non-boundary cases worked because of that invariant. The invariant was the whole problem. She stared at it on her notebook page. She wrote 3 lines underneath it. She crossed out 2. She drew a circle around the 3rd. Then she put her head down on the table and laughed for a full 30 seconds, alone in the library at 6 in the evening, with the snow falling outside. Day 6. She built the proof. She built it carefully. She built it the way her mother used to fold laundry, slowly, fold by fold, no shortcuts, every corner squared. The casework collapsed. About 80% of the hard cases died instantly under the invariant. The remaining cases reduced to a clean parity argument. A parity argument. The kind of argument any careful undergraduate could check. She could not believe it. She checked her work 3 times. She checked it a 4th time. The proof held. At 3 in the morning of day 7, she pushed her chair back from the table. She had a complete proof of the corrected statement, the one Ashford had been forced to write on the board. She also had, sketched in her notebook, what looked like a second proof, a simpler one, a proof of the original statement before Ashford had tightened the clauses, a proof a graduate student in 1968 could have written, if anyone had let him. That second proof scared her. She did not understand yet why it scared her. She slid the half-finished pages of the first proof under the office door of Eleanor Whitfield with a note that said only, "Am I crazy?" Whitfield read it on her morning walk to campus. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. She stood still for a long time. She whispered something that no one else heard. What she whispered was, "Oh, Nathaniel, you old fool. What did you do?" She walked the pages back to Simone's dorm. She slid them under the door. She wrote a single word at the top of the first page. Continue. Theodore Brennan was pacing his office at the Crimson. Olivia Sinclair was on a train headed back to Cambridge. Henry Caldwell was at his desk, struggling through the same problem set everyone else in Math 55 was struggling through, occasionally glancing at the empty seat in the third row. And Nathaniel Ashford was in his own apartment that night, alone, sitting at his kitchen table. In front of him was an old leather notebook. The cover said 1974. He had not opened it in a very long time. He opened it now. He read his own handwriting from when he was 30 years old and not yet famous and not yet afraid. He closed the notebook. He poured a glass of bourbon. He did not drink it. Simone, 2 miles away in her dorm, was just lying down on top of her bedspread with her shoes still on. Her phone was on the pillow beside her. The screen was lit with a one-line text from her mother. "Baby, you finish what you started. They've already underestimated you. That part is done." The clock on the wall said 2 in the morning. There were 16 hours left. What was waiting in that envelope Whitfield had clipped to the back of the second proof? Day 6. Late. Nearly 4 in the morning. The night before the deadline. Whitfield's reply note had said only, "Continue." But there had been a manila envelope clipped to the back of the second proof, the simpler one. Simone had not noticed it at first. She noticed it now. Inside the envelope was a manuscript, handwritten, 46 pages. The handwriting was neat and careful and from another era. The cover page said, "On a coloring problem in finite geometry, Cornelius Beaumont, April 1968. There was a small black and white photograph paper-clipped inside the cover. A young black man in a white shirt and a thin tie. He was smiling. He was leaning against a chalkboard at Harvard. The date on the back of the photo was April 1968. 3 months before he had left the university, the official record said, by mutual agreement. Simone read the manuscript. Cornelius Beaumont, in 1968, had stated this exact problem first, in a department seminar, in a room where Nathaniel Ashford, then a 30-year-old assistant professor, had been sitting in the back row. Beaumont's statement had been cleaner, simpler, without Ashford's later tightenings of the second clause, without the third clause Ashford had added in 1981, without the additional restriction Ashford had quietly inserted in 1996, the year a graduate student named Patricia Moore had come within 48 hours of solving it before her funding was, by departmental decision, not renewed. The manuscript also contained, in a margin note in Beaumont's handwriting, the start of a proof. The same invariant Simone had found on day 5, the same parity argument. Beaumont had been 3 pages from finishing the proof. 3 pages. And then the manuscript stopped. Simone closed the manuscript. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The man in the photograph was 29 years old, smiling, leaning against a chalkboard at Harvard, with no idea what was about to happen to him. This was no longer just a math problem. This was a record, 50 years long, of a man who had asked a good question and been punished for asking it, of a problem that had been kept open on a wall year after year by tightening the wording every time someone got close, so that one man could keep telling freshmen that nobody had solved it. Simone walked to the window of her dorm room. She watched the snow fall on the yard. She thought about the seminar room Ashford had promised to dedicate to her if she won. She thought about whose name should be on the door of that room, and it was not hers. The deadline was in 18 hours. The choice in front of her was not whether to solve it. She had already solved it. The choice was whether to walk into that auditorium tomorrow alone, or whether to walk in carrying a dead man's name. By 7 the next morning, the screenshot was everywhere. It was a screenshot of a single page from Simone's working notes. The page was the half-finished sketch of the second, simpler proof, the proof of the original Beaumont statement. In the margin, in Simone's handwriting, were 3 words: assuming Beaumont's framing. How the screenshot had been taken, nobody could prove. Whitfield had a theory. Whitfield's theory involved a teaching assistant named Walter Hollis, and a man Walter Hollis was very afraid of disappointing. Whitfield kept the theory to herself for now. The screenshot, posted to the Harvard message board at 6 in the morning by an anonymous account, had a caption: "She is not solving it. She is stealing it from a dead man." By 8, the post had 4,000 upvotes. By 9, it had migrated to 3 other platforms. By 10, the phrase being used was no longer affirmative action mathematics. It was now plagiarism. And the people using the word were not anonymous internet trolls anymore. They were tenured faculty in 3 different math departments. They were quoting it in emails to deans. Theodore Brennan from the Crimson, to his credit, was the only one in print who said in a brief sidebar that morning, "Let us please wait until we have heard from her." It was buried on page 4. At 11, Ashford found Simone in the hallway outside Maxwell Dworkin Auditorium, where the presentation was scheduled for 1 in the afternoon. He was alone. He was calm. He was not unkind. That was the worst part. "Miss Ingram, may I have a word?" She stopped. She nodded. He stood close enough that nobody else could hear. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, almost paternal. "I want to give you a way out. I want to give you a soft way out. If you stand on that stage today and present unverified work that depends on a manuscript no one can authenticate, I will be forced, Miss Ingram, against my own preferences, to ask you to withdraw from the course, privately, quietly. The story can have a kind ending. You go home for Thanksgiving. You start again in the spring. Nobody has to remember any of this." He paused. He looked at her with what almost looked like sympathy. "Or you can stand up there and end your career on national television. The choice is yours. I want you to know I'm not punishing you. I'm trying, in my own way, to help you." He waited. She did not answer. He nodded once, like a man who had done his duty, and walked away down the hallway. Simone went back to her dorm room. She sat on the floor of that dorm room for 36 minutes without moving. The proof was real. She knew the proof was real. But to present it, she would have to name the manuscript. To name the manuscript, she would have to explain how she had come by it. To explain how she had come by it, she would have to expose the woman who had given it to her. To do that, on a national stage, would burn 3 lives at once. She did not know if she could do it. For the first time in 7 days, she did not know if she could do it. The knock on her door at 12:15 was Eleanor Whitfield. Whitfield walked in. She was holding a sealed manila envelope. She set the envelope down on the desk. The envelope was thicker than the one before. "This is the original 1968 manuscript," Whitfield said, "the one Cornelius mailed to me before he left. I never published it. I should have. I was a postdoc. I was 28. Nathaniel was a rising star, and I was a young woman in a man's department, and I was afraid of him. That is my failure, Miss Ingram, not yours. Today, you stand up there with your work and his, both names. You don't need my permission. But you have it." Simone looked at her. "Why now?" Whitfield's voice did not shake, but her eyes did. "Because I am 58 years old, and I am tired of being afraid of him." I told this story because of a teacher I had once who was afraid of the same kind of man for 30 years and never said so out loud. She died still afraid. I think about her every time someone finally decides they've had enough. And that one moment, right there, that's the whole reason I do this. 1 in the afternoon. Maxwell Dworkin Auditorium, standing room only. The room had been booked for 40 people. There were now nearly 400 in it. People were standing along the walls, sitting on the floor, filling the doorways. The math department had sent everyone they could pull from class. The physics department had sent half of theirs. The Boston papers had sent reporters. WGBH had sent a camera. 60 Minutes had not been able to fly a producer up in time, but had sent a freelance shooter with a single tripod. Theodore Brennan from the Crimson sat in the front row, fingers already on the keys. Olivia Sinclair, the Princeton graduate student, sat 1 row behind him, leaning forward, holding her own notebook. Henry Caldwell was 3 rows back, sitting next to a girl from his dorm whose name was Lily, holding her hand without realizing he was holding it. Margaret Sullivan stood in the back, near the door. Eleanor Whitfield sat on the small platform beside the podium, her ankles crossed, her hands folded, her face perfectly still. Nathaniel Ashford sat at center stage in a leather chair. The leather chair was his idea. The microphone clipped to his lapel was his idea. The clock on the back wall, set to 1 hour exactly, was his idea. Everything in this room was designed by him to remind everyone that this was his stage, and Simone Ingram was a guest on it. Simone walked in at 1 o'clock exactly. She was wearing the same coat she had worn off the Greyhound. She carried a single manila envelope and a single piece of chalk. That was all. She walked to the chalkboard. She did not introduce herself. She did not look at Ashford. She looked at the room. "Good afternoon," she said. Her voice was steady. The microphones picked her up clean. "This problem is 56 years old, not 50. The first person to come close to solving it was Dr. Cornelius Beaumont in the spring of 1968. With Professor Whitfield's permission, I am going to walk you through Dr. Beaumont's framing first, and then mine." The room moved like water. Ashford's jaw set. Whitfield on the platform did not move. Simone wrote on the chalkboard, slowly, carefully. She did not show off. She showed her work. She started by reframing the problem, not as a question of which colorings were possible, which was how everyone, including Ashford, had been looking at it for 50 years, but as a question of which configurations were stable under a small perturbation. The shift sounded simple when she said it. Don't ask which paintings can hang on the wall, ask which paintings don't fall off when you tilt the wall. The room laughed once, gently, at the metaphor. It was the first time anyone had laughed in 3 days. She moved on. She showed the symmetry argument. She demonstrated with 3 drawings on the board that every historical attempt at the problem had stalled at the exact same place, the same boundary case. And she showed by overlaying Beaumont's original 1968 statement on Ashford's 2024 statement that the boundary case was the only place the 2 statements disagreed. The disagreement, she said, was the whole problem. Then she drew the invariant, a single counting function, a single integer you could compute about any configuration that did not change when you nudged the configuration. Once you had that integer, 80% of the hard cases collapsed in 2 lines. The remaining cases reduced to a clean parity argument any well-prepared sophomore could verify. She did not show every step. She did not need to. Anyone in the room with the training to follow could follow. Anyone without the training could see, on the faces of the people who did have the training, what was happening. Olivia Sinclair, in the second row, was crying very quietly. She was crying because she had been working on this exact problem for 6 years, and she had never thought to ask the question Simone had just asked. Halfway through, Simone paused. She looked at Ashford. She did not raise her voice. "Professor, Your stated proof of impossibility, the one you mentioned in lecture last Monday, doesn't actually rule out the boundary case. It assumes the configuration is generic. That assumption is doing all the work. With respect, sir, that is the subtle flaw. It has been the flaw all along. Ashford did not move. The leather of the chair creaked once. Simone went back to the board. She finished the proof. She stepped back. She set the chalk down on the ledge. She turned to the room. For 20 seconds, no one spoke. No one moved. Olivia Sinclair stood up. She did not clap. She just stood. Then a man in the second row stood, then a woman in the third row, then Henry Caldwell, then Lily. Then, a row at a time, like a wave, the room rose to its feet. The Princeton graduate student was openly weeping now. The freelance shooter was filming the audience instead of the chalkboard. Theodore Brennan was typing without looking at his keyboard. Simone waited. The applause went on for 2 full minutes. She did not smile. She did not bow. She waited. When it began to quiet, she turned to Ashford. She held the manila envelope. She did not hand it to him. She held it. "With respect, sir," she said, "the problem has not been unsolved for 50 years. It has been unstated for 50 years. There is a difference." The room went silent again. The microphone picked up the silence the way it had picked up the words. Ashford sat in his leather chair for what felt like a long time. He looked at the chalkboard. He looked at his own hands. He looked at the third row, where Eleanor Whitfield sat with her ankles still crossed and her face still. Then he reached up and unclipped the microphone from his lapel. He held it in his hand for a moment, as if he had forgotten what it was. He spoke into it. His voice was flat. It was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was the voice of a man who had just understood that the last 50 years of his career had been a hand he had been losing the whole time without knowing it. "Miss Ingram, I owe you a dinner. And I owe Cornelius Beaumont an apology that I cannot deliver." He set the microphone on the arm of the chair. He stood up. He walked out of the auditorium through the side door. He did not return. What had just happened in that room? 48 hours later, Eleanor Whitfield, in her capacity as chair of the mathematics department, walked into the department archive and asked the archivist for the personnel file of one Cornelius Beaumont, postdoctoral fellow, 1966 to 1968. The archivist found it after about 20 minutes. The file contained, among other things, an internal letter of recommendation written in the spring of 1968. Recommendation against renewal. 3 pages. Polite, articulate, devastating. The letter described Beaumont's work as promising but derivative. It questioned his temperament. It suggested that his recent seminar contributions were overambitious for a man of his background. The phrase of his background was right there, in black ink, on Harvard letterhead. 56 years old. The letter was signed by Nathaniel Ashford, assistant professor. Cornelius Beaumont had left Harvard in June 1968. He had not been able to find another academic position. He had taken a job teaching high school mathematics in West Baltimore. He had taught there for 23 years. He had died in 1991 of a heart attack while grading exams at his kitchen table. He had 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren. The oldest daughter, a 57-year-old nurse named Rosalind Beaumont, received a phone call from Eleanor Whitfield on a Thursday afternoon and flew to Cambridge the next morning. The math department announced 2 things on the following Monday. The first was the formal posthumous publication of Beaumont's 1968 manuscript, with his name on it as primary author. The second was the establishment of the Beaumont and Ingram Reading Group, a permanent fixture in the department's seminar calendar. Ashford was asked to sign a public acknowledgement. He signed it. The signature was steady. His face, in the photograph that ran in the Crimson the next day, was not. The same alumni who 10 days earlier had been emailing Whitfield demanding she rein in the freshman were now writing checks to fund a fellowship in Beaumont's name. One of the largest donations came from a woman named Patricia Moore, 55 years old, a quantitative analyst in Connecticut whose Harvard graduate funding had not been renewed in 1996. Justice, it turned out, was not loud. It was the sound of a fountain pen on a piece of paper, 56 years late. So what does a young woman do after she has just rewritten the history of a building she only walked into 10 days ago? 2 weeks later, in the small seminar room next to Maxwell Dworkin, the brass plaque under the chalkboard was replaced. The old plaque, the one that had said "Posed Fall 1974," unsolved by any Harvard undergraduate for 50 years, was taken down quietly and given to the archive. The new plaque was a little larger. It read, "Posed 1968 by Dr. Cornelius Beaumont. Solved 2024 by Simone Ingram." Stated correctly. At last. Ashford was not in the room for the ceremony. He had taken what the department officially called an extended sabbatical. He had sent a letter, however, which Eleanor Whitfield read aloud from the small podium. The letter was 2 sentences long. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about him. For a long time. That was all. The audience could decide whether it was enough. Simone spoke for 90 seconds. Not a speech, just a thank you. She thanked her mother on the phone in Detroit, listening on speaker. She thanked Eleanor Whitfield, who was sitting in the front row with her ankles crossed. She thanked Margaret Sullivan, who was leaning against the back wall with her arms folded and her eyes red. She thanked Rosalind Beaumont, who was standing beside the new plaque, holding a folded American flag from her father's funeral. She thanked Cornelius Beaumont, by name, twice. She did not thank Nathaniel Ashford. She did not punish him either. She simply did not include him. Then she walked out of the seminar room. She walked across Harvard Yard at dusk, alone, with her notebook under her arm and her coat collar turned up against the wind. The first snow of the year was just beginning to fall. She did not look back at the building. She had a problem set due on Tuesday, and she was already thinking about it. Some people spend 50 years guarding a problem. Some people spend 1 week solving it. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is whether you needed the problem to stay unsolved. If you have ever been told you didn't belong in the room, tell me about it in the comments. Share this with the person who needed to hear it tonight. And subscribe, because next week there is another story I want to tell you. About a janitor, a boardroom, and a question nobody expected him to answer.